And we are live. Good evening, geeks. Dante D here, and welcome to the channel, the podcast where we talk about comic books and other geek stuff. Tonight, we have a very special guest. Uh, I, you are probably the specialist, most special, right? And you've been on this channel so many times to talk about comic books. This is Eric Breen. Eric, welcome back to the show for probably the 15th time?
I don't know. It's been that many, but glad to be back. Happy New Year and all that.
Happy New Year to you for sure. At the time of this recording, it's February, right? So I can't believe that January and the holidays are all said and done, right? So
I know.
Hopefully 2022 is better than 2021.
I don't think it can be worse. So
yeah. So let's just keep hoping, right? Now, with respect to podcasts and live streams, how I have to ask, how many live streams have you been on?
Oh God, I have no idea.
You've probably been on every single comic book channel I can think of.
No, but I've done a lot of stuff with Eglantine from Eglantine Loves Comics. I have done the Perch Friday night stream a couple times. I've been on the Comics Aficionados on Thinking Critical, a handful of times, and just done a lot of other stuff with guys like Ash on Comics and folks like that. So I mean, I don't do anything on my channel other than the occasional haul video. So I'm kind of like, have Mike, will travel.
Right, exactly. Actually, I think I remember last time we did a live stream, there was someone, I think a friend of yours, I don't remember who it was, who referred to you as the live stream whore.
That would have probably been Eglantine.
Yeah. So yeah, because Eric is very prolific in the comic book community in appearing on live streams. But Eric has a breadth of knowledge to share on the comic book community. You've been collecting comic books since you were 10 years old?
13.
So, and I remember you telling me that you had sold quite a huge collection, but now you're building it up again, aren't you?
Yeah, I didn't do a very good job of quitting. So yeah, I'm kind of I'm kind of back to being a collector.
Awesome. So before I really want to ask you a little bit more about your collection here, but first we have some people that are rolling in here. We have Maranya, who is always on the live streams whenever we have Eric on the show. So welcome. And then we have Victor Perez, who's saying, "Hey, look who's back live. It's been a while." Yes, it has been a while. So I know I keep saying we want to do this monthly, so I think we definitely have to keep a monthly schedule for sure. So you had mentioned that at one point you probably owned most of the Marvel Silver Age keys, correct?
I had everything from Fantastic Four #1 through Fear Itself, which I think was 2011. So superhero books, I had 99.9% of them in any key that mattered. I had full sets of Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Hulk, Iron Man, Avengers, X-Men, blah blah blah.
Absolutely amazing. Lovell Lucas Jr., big guy on this channel here, always participating. Welcome, Eric. So and then you said you had to sell off the collection, and now how big has the collection become now? Give a collection update now.
Oh God, I'd say it's probably over 10,000 again.
Wow. At its height, how many did you have?
55,000.
55,000. That's incredible. Which is, I find that really interesting because a few years ago on YouTube there was a video that was done about the biggest comic book collection in the world, and it was some dude. I think his name's Bob. I'm just gonna throw out a name there, Bob. I don't know. You've probably even seen the video, and he has 50,000. So I was thinking to myself, 50,000. I'm like, I know there are collections bigger than 50,000.
Yeah, yes, there were.
Yeah, for sure. So, but yeah, so you're up to 10,000 again. And we're starting off here with a question. It says, "Hey, question for Eric. Were you ever in possession of Sergeant Rock's original run? And if so, what's the rarest issue?"
I did not have a full run of Our Army at War, but I had a crushed copy of issue 81 that was there's some dispute over what's the actual first appearance, but this is the one that has the cover with him on the cover says the Rock of Easy Company. And I had sporadic issues from that point up. The thing was, when you're amassing 50,000 plus comics, and this was also back at a time when new comics were good. So I was probably buying north of 100 titles a month. And the time it takes to read 100 new comics a month doesn't leave a whole lot of time for reading back issues. So I
Absolutely.
would get them. I'd look at them. I'd mark them in. I'd bag them, board them, box them. And sometimes that would be the last time I saw them until well, hell, I didn't see them all when I sold them. So a lot of them I never saw again. Now what I do is I will read the comic before I bag and board it and put it into the collection, which means there's way too many books lying around waiting to be read. Now, I know I've steered off track of that, but I probably had 150 issues of Our Army at War and Sergeant Rock at the time.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that because I do the same thing. I can't bag and board a comic and add it to the collection until I've read it. Now, for those of you that have been watching the channel for a while, you know that I don't actively really collect anymore. I'm more into trades and omnibuses now, but I still have a backlog of back issues, believe it or not, that I still have not read. So I'm getting around to them, but it takes a while when you're a reader of comic books and you're trying to live a life. It can be difficult to spend all day reading comics, isn't it?
Yeah, I was kind of like the opposite. After I sold, I decided I would just get trades and omnibuses, and then I just picked up a random book here and there because Marvel's much better about reprinting their past than DC.
Absolutely, I agree.
And so and I got a lot of the Marvel stuff back. So I've got the stories there. I have that mug. It's filled with change, or I would go and hoist
This one here?
Yes.
For those of you that are listening to the podcast, I have a Marvel mug with a bunch of Marvel characters on it, and Eric's just telling me that he has the same one. It's a popular mug, isn't it?
It must be. Where was I before I got distracted by your mug?
I mean, and you know what? All of this, I'm just kind of taking a step back in what we're discussing, and there's such a passion that has developed for comic books for many fans over the years, and it's intergenerational. And what we're talking about specifically today is the origin of comic book collecting, how it's evolved over the years, and basically where are we going. So let's talk about the origin of comic book collecting, because I think it's really kind of difficult to pinpoint a period in history when people started deciding to keep comic books as opposed to recycling. Because for those of you out there that don't know, comic books were not always kept. Eric, why don't you tell everyone what people did with comic books in the 1930s and 40s?
Read them, traded them, flipped them, folded them up, put them in their back pocket, everything, and then waited for mom to throw them out.
Exactly. Essentially, comic books to this day are probably the only they're pulp, right? And it's probably the only piece of pulp nowadays that kind of survives, right? Because I mean, pulp magazines definitely aren't really published anymore. And people essentially they were meant to be purchased, read, and then recycled, or if you were a kid, you were trading them, so on and so forth. But then also during the war, something interesting went on, right? The paper drives. Did you hear
Yeah,
about those?
yeah, that's any paper they could get, from newspapers to comics to magazines, all went into the war effort, and large chunks of print runs of a lot of golden age books, were lost to that.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, Marania saying during the World War II era, moms took the comic books to the paper drives because I think a lot of kids would just kind of leave them around the house, and mom wanted to just get rid of them because it was just needless clutter, right? But
Mhm.
what people didn't know is that the moms of the 1930s and 40s essentially rendered these comic books essentially priceless, right? And
Yeah,
very, very, very expensive. Uh, so it's that I think you can say um, is where the seeds were sown for the eventual uh, birth of comic book collecting. Would you agree?
yeah. I think that, yeah, I don't know how much collecting was done in the pre-code era, and then even early into the code era. Yeah, I think the collecting might have, and this is just speculation on my part. I would say it probably kicked into gear in like the late 50s and the early 60s, when you started seeing amateur fanzines and people started paying attention. They started communicating with each other a little bit, and I think, I'm sure that the birth of modern Marvel comics helped also. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we actually we did a video a long time ago on this on the channel talking about how Marvel pretty much unintentionally, I think, kind of gave birth to the comic book collecting hobby. What are some of those things that Marvel did to kind of fuel the collecting craze in the early 60s?
I would say story. Okay, with DC, you could read an issue here, you could read an issue there, but you didn't need to read the ones in between to know what was going on in the next one, because it always started over. Really wasn't until, I would argue, it might have been Justice League 21 and 22 was the first time DC did a two-part story. I could be wrong, but Marvel, you kind of had to read each issue to know what was going on. So if you need to get every issue, well, maybe hang on to them, because you got a little something going there, and then you end up with a stack of books, and you go, hey, this is kind of fun. Maybe I'll just keep doing this. And I think Marvel definitely lent itself more to hanging on to them, because you might need to go back and look at one to help you realize what was going on. Something in issue 3 might have mattered in issue 8, so you might as well have them both, because then there was no internet to look things up on in those days.
Exactly. So it seems that people were really starting to keep uh, comic book back issues for out of necessity, because Marvel kind of did something daring. I think they were the first company to interconnect all of their titles in their line, right? Their comic book line. And you were starting to get the idea that all of these characters exist in the same universe. I know a little bit of that was done with Batman and Superman, but to the extent that Marvel did it, I think that was unprecedented at the time. Would you agree?
It was close, because once DC formed the Justice League, which did predate Fantastic Four, that let everybody know that those heroes were all in the same universe. And then you started seeing Flash would show up in Green Lantern, and vice versa. Not a whole lot other than those, but it kind of, I would say DC probably did it first, but didn't, no pun intended, make an issue out of it like Marvel did.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Marania here is just saying that she legit just wanted to read, and I think that's kind of unheard of nowadays, because I kind of feel that today there's more of a focus on the collecting of the books rather than the actual reading. Right. It's actually kind of crazy that people there are actually many fans out there that actually just buy the books and don't even read them. Do you know any people like that?
I do. I think they're more of that falls more into the speculator end of it and the variant collectors. I mean, that's become a thing because new comics have changed so much that, I mean, it's an entirely different, you know, art form at this point. And some people that, if you were reading back then, that might be all you're doing now, is just buying them for the variant covers or chasing the next valuable book, because it's not the same. And I see more people. I kind of think that now comics have come full circle and they're not being produced to be collected as comics, because everything's written for the trades and the omnibuses, and hopefully that Netflix deal that 90% of the writers are angling for.
Absolutely.
And I think the audience that they're chasing, they're not the collecting type. They'll just buy something that catches their eye, and if it doesn't offend them, they might buy the next one. But but like 45, 6 years ago when I started doing this, I had to get every issue. I mean,
Right.
that next issue of Spider-Man came out, or whatever it might be. I had to have it. I don't see that as much, and when I do, they kind of look to be in my age group a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there was a genuine passion for it back then, for sure. But you mentioned something interesting, that Marvel started connecting all of their stories, and you had to read one issue to figure out what was going in another issue. And it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I was listening to an interview with Denny O'Neil not too long ago, and he actually explained why comic books back then, anyway, generally, especially DC, generally did not uh carry on a story past one or two issues. And he was saying that most people were buying comic books off of the newsstands, and just because they bought, say, issue 154 did not necessarily mean that they were going to be able to buy 155 the next month, right? Whether due to just the publishers not carrying it that month, or because I don't know, because obviously I wasn't around during the time, but when you were buying comic books off the newsstands and off the racks at the drugstores and things like that, what was it always the same comics every single month, or were you seeing different ones all the time?
I think what Mr. O'Neill was speaking to was a few years before I started, because when I started the hobby in the mid 70s, it was more consistent. I mean, there were I do remember I couldn't find a lot of the comics that were cover dated November from 1976, which would have made them August, would have come out in August, because they were about 3 months ahead in those days. So it wasn't, all the kinks weren't worked out, because I said, and then the next month came and they were all back on the shelves again, and it was hard to find. I probably didn't find some of those books until years later when I finally found a comic book store. But I do know that, yeah, and he was right about that. I mean, I said you never knew when the next issue was going to come out. But again, I don't think that invalidates what I said, because, like I said, Marvel did lend itself more to collecting.
Hmm.
And even though some months you couldn't find what you were looking for. All I know, Dante, is in the winter of 76, 77, my 14-year-old self trudged up to walked a mile and a half to a bus stop, 0-degree weather, snow everywhere, to take a bus downtown and then up the street to a newsstand, hoping that the guy would have the books. Hell, now that I think about it, well, hell, now I wouldn't walk across the street in that weather, but that's beside the point. It's like, what the hell was that fool doing standing out in that street corner? But they were there. And I got my pile of books and I got back on the bus and trudged home. And I mean, we weren't even going to school. The weather was so bad.
Right. And I think the only thing that was missing from that story, Eric, was that you went uphill both ways.
Oh, that went without saying.
So Eric, as you can see, was a very dedicated fan.
Eric was an idiot.
This is probably around the time that you started seeing people starting to collect more, because just going back to the 30s, 40s, and 50s briefly, I think it was okay, this is funny. The comic book frog says Breen didn't go to school.
You can mute him. He's a troll.
Yeah. Yeah, every time we have Eric on, there's always some good humor. Eric, it's always this is like part interview Eric and part roast Eric, right? So
I gotta tell you real quick, Comic Book Frog is part of a channel called the Geeky Puppet Show, and we read comics on live on YouTube on their channel, and it's well worth the time. We do a lot of ad-libbing, and it's some of the most fun I've ever had on YouTube.
Awesome. Okay, I'll have to check that out. You guys do voices and everything too?
Sometimes.
Okay.
When we read Spider-Man, I do a hideous Stan Lee because I'm the narrator. And
okay, just give us a Stan Lee real quick. Just say, with great power comes great responsibility.
With great power, there must come great responsibility.
That's actually really good. that's actually pretty spot on, I have to say.
Excelsior.
Yeah. Okay, so now you got me. I am definitely going to have to check that out for sure. But yeah, going back to the the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it definitely was the exception, not the rule, that people were collecting. And I actually read a very touching story about, I'm sure you heard about the Promise collection that was all the hype last year, correct?
This is the one about the Korean War veteran?
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know the story, there was a beautiful pedigree collection found in the last year that did really well at auction. And the story was this young man, he bought all these comic books, valuable comic books, off the stands in the 30s and 40s. Turns out he went to war. He was in the Korean War, and he was with his brother. And he said to his brother, if anything happens to me, please promise me you'll take care of my funny book collection. And turns out the comic book collector in the story he died, died in action. And his brother kept that collection until it was found last year. So I thought that was pretty touching.
How many books was it? That part of the story I didn't hear.
It wasn't, I don't think it was like huge. I think it was correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone listening knows, but I recall it being maybe a few hundred. It wasn't something like an Edgar Church or anything like that, but there were a few hundred, and there were some really nice ones in there from what I understand.
Now, my only question would be, at this point, seeing where the industry's gone, where's the market for a lot of those books? Because I'm sure every one of them was very expensive, and I'm sure it did well in auction. But then what? Unless it was bought by a private collector, because those would be very hard to flip, because key issues are in high demand. But like an 8.5 or 9.0 of, say, Adventure Comics 79 And then somebody will tell me, well, 79's got the first appearance of Arm Fall Off Boy. And but assuming it's not, who's going to pay that kind of money for those? And that's what I wonder, because this hobby has done a terrible job of creating the next generation.
Absolutely.
I mean, you're always going to get people to shell out giant dollars for Spider-Man, but I'm just kind of curious. I mean, that said, I would love to have seen those books.
Right. I think if you go, if you search it, there is an article where they kind of show some of the highlights in the collection. Like I know there was like the first appearance of the Riddler in there. That one stuck out to me for some reason. There were a few others too, but I think it was mostly like kind of DC stuff, right?
It makes sense. Marvel was they were kind
timely,
they had just at that point, timely was just chasing whatever trend. Correct. I'm guessing they probably would have been just getting into horror around that time then.
Correct. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, definitely the exception and not the rule. So and I think that brings up there was a
to your point from earlier.
Yep, exactly. The podcasting horror, right? My God, this Eric Breen guy's everywhere. Does he get paid for this? Unfortunately, I'm not paying him.
Hello, Spinnerack. I'm sure everybody knows your real name, but I'll just in case they don't. Spinnerack has joined us a couple times on the Wednesday show, because I forgot to mention, because I want to keep it separate. On a channel called Graphic Man, we do a show every Wednesday called The Four Color Fossils. And the criteria is 50 and over, except for our foreign correspondent, Paulo Costa. And we show books, and like, for example, the Christmas issue or episode we did, Spinner pulls out Golden Age Batman's Action Comics, Superman's Christmas covers. And he's got the one with Superman trying to shove Santa's fat ass down the chimney because Santa's hired him to get him back in shape. Incredible stuff. And he has a channel well worth checking out. I mean, he has fantastic production value. Great channel. I really like him.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll have to check that out for sure. Now, Lovell Lucas Jr. In a question earlier up here, I had it pinned for a while. Don't know if I can find it now, but basically he was here we go. He was asking when the first shops started appearing. Now, I think you'd know more about this than me, but I was under the impression that you had a few kind of outlier shops kind of appearing in the 60s, was it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know when the first, I want to say probably sometime in the late 60s, early 70s, that the first actual comic book shops opened. I know for myself, when this would have been 75 or 76, there was this place called Moles. They sold used records in the front, because it was, their 8-tracks were the other form of music at that time. It's so long ago. But the back room just had tables with stacks of comic books and Rolling Stones.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was heaven on earth. 13, 14 years old, I thought that was the neatest place in the world. But I think the comics were, I don't know if they, like I said, there was no rhyme or reason to them. They were just literally stacked up, not in boxes, just. And then there was a bookstore in downtown Cincinnati that kind of had the same thing. But I didn't, I think there was a couple shops that dabbled in it in the second half of the 70s where I lived. But then the one that I found in 1981, a place called, well, at the time it was Book World, now it's called Comic Book World. That was the first, fully formed, fully fledged store in my area. And they are still going today, and that's actually where my quote unquote real job is now.
That's amazing. Because these stores, oh, this is funny. Sorry, I know we keep interrupting here, but the frog keeps saying, so Eric's getting paid in candy canes, when he does podcasts, or Cheddar Pringles.
Yeah.
And not to mention that, Eric, you're a lot older than I thought. The first comic was made when you were a boy.
Now, Comic Book Frog sent me Pringles for Christmas. He sent them through FedEx or UPS, and let's say I got 4 cans of lovely Pringles shavings by the time they got to me.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Because
Absolutely.
I don't know how densely they're packed to actually get to stores not destroyed.
Right.
I can tell you they're not sent individually through UPS.
Well, by the time you got them, you could probably use them as breadcrumbs for your chicken breast or something like that,
Sure.
right? Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, so there was a genuine need for comic book stores in the 60s and 70s, because like you said, you have these publishers, i.e. Marvel, that are now connecting all these books into one cohesive universe. And as we were saying, that it was difficult to be able to purchase every single issue of a particular title off of the newsstands, because it wasn't always a guarantee that you were going to get it. So now fans are thinking, okay, maybe I should open a store so these people can actually buy every issue of this book. So I think the important thing to underline here is that the collecting hobby started not as a way to covet these books, but as a genuine need to have these books, right? And to be able to reference them later with respect to story. Correct?
Yeah, and I don't know how it worked in the pre-direct market days, as far as if if stores could get deals with the distributors. I'm assuming they could, because in those days, like I said, you could return the ones you didn't sell, but if you had a store that specialized in them, you probably weren't as apt to do that. But I'm not sure how that worked. That's one thing I've never read up on in this. Is how that worked before that. That would make a good book if anybody hasn't written that yet.
Yeah, I think the whole topic of comic book distribution, I thought is very, very interesting, because like Eric said, you had to these publishers, or sorry, these the newsstand owners and all the drugstores, et cetera, they were buying these books. Whatever they wouldn't sell, they just had to like rip off the cover. They would send the cover back, not even the whole book, just the cover, and get a refund, right? Funny enough, I've actually heard and read some blogs online that said that there are actually some store owners that would destroy the comic, rip the cover off, and then just sell the coverless comic for like a nickel or something like that. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, because I was wondering, because every so often you actually see coverless comics coming up on eBay, and I'm like, who? Back when I started the hobby, I was like, why would anybody back then have torn off the cover? So, but
and then obviously, if you tore off the front cover, a lot of times you would just pull the back one off too and just throw the rest of it,
right,
or with the back cover. But I've came across a box at the store a couple months ago, and I said, "What is this?" I said, "We're throwing it out." So I took it and actually pulled some decent stuff out of it. But one of the things in that box was a coverless Tales of Suspense 57.
Oh, wow.
First Hawkeye.
Yeah.
And that actually gets money.
Yeah, for sure.
I personally, I don't get that. I mean, I'll take a book with no back cover, but if it doesn't have a full front cover, I said, if you offered me a coverless Action Comics #1, okay, I'd take it. But I said, I mean, really, without the front cover, to me, it's not a comic without the front cover.
Right. Exactly. I would pick up I would definitely pick up coverless comic books, but I wouldn't be spending more than a few cents on them. That's for sure. You're not getting a whole $1 out of me for a coverless comic. That's for sure.
Hello to Trusty Sidekick. He's the guy we bring in for gravitas on our readings.
Okay.
I mean, he sounds like a grown up in everything.
That's amazing. So he has a really kind of James Earl Jones type voice, or
he's He's I'm basically giving him crap because he's close to as old as me, but he's got he's a true voice talent.
Oh,
He
good.
can do more than one. If he's doing two different characters, they sound like two different characters.
That's amazing. Good. Uh, now we were saying that comic books, the hobby started off as the genuine need because it all boiled down to narrative. Okay, at what point did comic books become about the money and not the story?
Okay, what in what way are you asking that question? As far as like for the companies or for the people buying the comics?
So the collector. So like, when did it become about the value of the book as opposed to like, oh, I need to see this issue because so I know what's going on in another issue.
I would think it became about the money, and again, this is just my personal opinion. Right around the time of the first Michael Keaton Batman, and I'll tell you
Yeah.
why. If you go back and look at an old Overstreet price guide, and you look and say like you pick up like 1983, for example, you look at the value of Amazing Fantasy 15 or Spider-Man, you could still afford them. Hell,
Hmm.
I bought Spider-Man #1 twice in the 80s.
Wow.
One time for $70. There
I
was
mean,
a
back then
time
that was a lot of money back then, but
it was, but it wasn't. I mean, it's comic book prices have risen like Tea Party Boston era prices.
yeah,
It's I mean, it's just stepped on inflation's head. Um,
yeah,
and I think right around the late 80s, and I think because I remember when the Batman movie came out, Batman comics values shot up almost overnight.
yeah,
I guess that was the first example of like now when the Disney Plus decides they're going to use a character, that first appearance can go from dollar bin to $70 overnight
exactly.
because the speculators come pouring in. But there was some point, after in the late 80s, early 90s, where you started seeing precipitous jumps in the value of key issues, and it doesn't seem to have stopped even to this day.
Absolutely. And we're gonna get to what's going on today because I just think it's absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, I think you make a good point there. And Victor Perez is saying, what about the shavings from Action Comics #1? I think that was hilarious. We actually did a video about that when it was happening. So for those of you that don't know about this instance, there were like little like crumpled up pieces from Action Comics #1. They were shavings essentially that were in a plastic bag and they were actually auctioned off. And I forget how much they sold for, but it was something stupid. Why? Why would someone spend money on that?
These are the same people that would bid on a professional athlete's chewed gum.
Right. Exactly.
There's or that cute girl TikToker's bathwater that they say. I don't get it.
Yeah.
It's there's a cloud up there somewhere.
Yeah. Exactly. I agree. It's strange, but I mean, I teach his own, right? Yeah, and then I mean, there were a few attempts, I think, in the 1970s to kind of view a little bit of um collectors speculation because there was the odd cover in the 70s I think that would like have like a little label that would say first issue collector's item, like
And, and I'm, and I'm wondering if some of those weren't even tongue in cheek in those days.
mhm.
I mean, there obviously there were people that collected them, but that's or maybe they were trying to start. Who knows? I said
Yeah, No, definitely for sure. Um, Also, I think it was really interesting how you made mention of the Batman 1989. Because from what I understand, I was little back then, but from what I understand, that was the time when things really just exploded in with speculation, right? Uh, and basically, like we said before Batman 1989, people were just trying to collect, out of genuine interest. They were collecting for, you know, story narrative, right? Then Batman 1989, something interesting happened. Comic books started getting press. Uh, can you think of the first comic book that got press? I was under the impression that it was Batman 428, Death of Robin. Was that the first
Oh,
comic ever to get like a mainstream news story?
that's a really good question. I know that. I mean, as far as individual issues go, you might be right because some of the main, you know, mags like Time covered Superman's 50th birthday, and that was a year or two before. Um, they killed off Jason Todd. But that's a good question. If that was the first time that an individual comic, got a write up.
Yeah. That and again, Denny O'Neil's one of my favorite, you know, rest his soul. But he was actually one of my favorite characters in the industry, and he had mentioned that when he was editor of Batman, like people were blaming him for killing Robin. Like people were just outraged that Robin was dead, but they had no idea that this wasn't the Dick Grayson Robin. This was like Jason Todd, right? So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, but that's where you kind of got the impression that comic books had become so ingrained in popular culture, whether you thought they were mainstream or not, because people were attached to these characters, right? So, yeah. Now, um, obviously, things after the Batman 1989 movie, I think the focus of collecting changed, and this was especially true of the 90s. Now tell me about the Wild West of the 90s.
Oh God. The era of gimmickry.
Yeah.
Um, Marvel's for Marvel's part, they had a history of they come up with something that works, so they run it into the ground.
Hmm.
Whether it's heroes in ponytails, die cut chromium covers, whatever using the same characters to wretched excess and then use them some more. Um, yeah, it's funny. I said, Marvel used every gimmick in the book. They lost all their top artists when they broke off to form Image, and DC just chugged along doing great comics, and they just got pummeled in sales.
Hmm.
I mean, and that's kind of when I learned. I mean, it shouldn't have surprised me because the most uh, copies of records sold in its first week, I think, is an NSYNC album sold 2.2 million copies in its first week, like the highest recorded number. And I'm just going to go on a limb and say that wasn't the best album out at the time. So it doesn't surprise me that the company doing the best comics were looking up at you know uh, Marvel, who people will argue with me, but the early '90s or the first half of the '90s wasn't their best time in history.
Yeah.
And Image,
For
enough said. I mean, they were
Yeah,
aptly named.
for sure. This but after the Batman 1989 movie, a couple things were going on here, I think, really. so comics are getting mainstream media attention, but then also I think the people that grew up with these original characters, Superman, the people that were around for the first appearance of Superman, Batman, all those, okay, they were like probably in their 50s by this point, and they were now probably starting to get nostalgic in their middle age and trying to pick up these books. So I think when there's this big rush to get all these classic books, the price goes up, right?
Well, yeah, and obviously there's not as many of them as there are the stuff coming out today, which Maranya brought up, which is one of the other things that just did, irreparable harm to this hobby, was you had people in the 90s thinking that like Death of Superman was going to pay for their kids' college.
Right.
Maybe if they'd gone to college a day or two, they'd realized that, although going today, I'm not sure they would have learned this, but if there are a million of something, it ain't rare.
Yep. Exactly.
But you're a good point, though. I said by the time the Batman movie came out, if you were a 10-year-old, if you were 8 or 9 when Action Comics #1 came out, you'd have been my age by 1989.
Exactly, right?
So yeah, there definitely would have been a nostalgic twinge, I'm sure. But how much of that made it into the shops? I don't know.
Right. And but that's the thing, though. Comics at the time were getting all this attention because these classic books were selling for a lot of money, but they were also genuinely rare. So now the media, they start doing stories not only on Robin dying in the comic book, but now they're doing stories on some guy buying Action Comics #1 or Detective 27 for a lot of money. And now they're doing stories saying that comics are a better investment than the stock market. I remember Stan Lee saying that in an interview. He's like, someone did a story on, comics are better investment than the stock market. And that's when things just went nuts in the 90s, right?
Yeah. And Spinner brought up something also, though, and I don't know when this rose to prominence, but the grading, the CGC, the slabbing of comics.
I was actually going to get to that, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And Stan Lee was right, and he still is to a point. Again, there's always going to be a market for Spider-Man 5 where he meets Doctor Doom.
Mm-hmm.
But those people that are out there that paid $1,000 for that 1 in 1,000 variant, that might be worth $100 now.
Exactly.
It might still be worth $1,000, but old Spider-Mans, they're not coming back down. Just I said it, just for those of you out there that are thinking about speculating. Now, some people just have fun rolling the dice on that stuff, and they even like looking at all the different covers and stuff like that.
Sure.
But when you're dealing in modern keys, like for example, the Avengers West Coast 45, the first White Vision. When WandaVision came out, that went from $1 bin book to $100.
Wow.
That series is less than 6 months old now, and that issue's already dropped $40. They've given 40 of it back.
Wow.
But you know what hasn't? Avengers 57, the first Vision.
The first Vision.
So that's
that's something definitely to keep in mind for those of you that invest in modern keys, which I personally, this is my opinion, I personally think investing in modern keys is kind of a waste of time and money, actually, but that's just my opinion. Yeah, at this point in the 90s, this is when things now become not about collecting because you like it, but collecting for money and for value, right? And this is, I think, something that has not changed since the 90s. Not much has changed, I think, with respect to comic book collecting since the 90s. The volume may not be there in terms of, print runs, but the intention with comic books, I think, is still there, that people are buying these books, not so much for reading them, not so much for, whatever, but they're buying them for for investment.
There, well, I mean, there is a percentage of people that do that. You know, I think the percentage of people that if you prorate everything, you know, as far as like the ever shrinking, you know, hobby, I think the sector of the hobby that has taken the biggest hit is the comic book collector in the respect of, you know, completing runs, maintaining a wide breadth of books. Because I think that, like I said, the speculators are still there, the readers are still there, but I think, and this is again, I think the comic book industry bears the brunt of the blame here. They're just not really made to be collected anymore.
Right.
No writer or artist stays on a book for any appreciable length of time.
Right.
Editorial changes so much. Well, hell, if you even have editors, I'm not sure DC has them right now. They fired them all a year ago. Marvel's editors, most of them are, you know, former interns that are doing the job because Marvel will pay them $40,000 a year to work in New York.
Mm-hmm.
You know what 40,000 buys you in New York?
Nothing.
Not much.
Right.
And so you know you get what you pay for.
Right.
So there's the books themselves. I said, you know, they're, yes, the stories are continuing, but it's like they used to write for it used to be you could, you know, get a great 1 or 2 part story. Then it became writing for the trades. Now it seems like they're writing for the omnibuses. I mean, you can buy individual issues where nothing happens. And
Absolutely.
why would you buy that book? Now, if it's tucked into a trade, you know, you might go, "Oh, God, nothing happened in these 20 pages," but then, you know, you got the next part of the story right there. If
Exactly.
you're paying $4, $5, $6 and you get a book that's just a bunch of people sitting around a bistro, you know, talking,
Yep.
you're not gonna be happy. So I said it's and there's a lot of that in the hobby that, as I said, just the collecting part seems to have just kind of waned.
Exactly. Yeah. I think you make a good point about the omnibuses, because I mean, when you look at how much an omnibus is, they're like easily over $100 a pop, right? And you know, I think the trades in the omnibuses is what is making these companies their money nowadays. It's actually almost like free money. All they have to do is reprint classic stories, and people will buy it.
I want to answer take a shot at the
Yeah.
question Ed just asked. Um, Hello, Ed, long suffering Commanders fan now. Um, is it by design, no longer keeping creative teams together on books long term? I think comics have this belief now that things get stale very quick. So I think part of it's by design. Part of it is, if they've got a good team, they're going to get to where they don't want to pay them anymore. And so, you know, teams don't stay together. And there really aren't. I mean, you've got, you know, like Tom King and Clay Mann, although I said, you know, Tom King, I don't think is a very good writer, but that's beside the point. But I mean, like the Burns in Austin is the Lee Kirby's, just the O'Neill Adams. There doesn't seem to be a lot of those in the industry at this point. And again, like I said, I I don't know. I know that, say, like this particular iteration of Fantastic Four, Dan Slott's written every issue. I don't know how many artists he's had along the way, so I don't know if they've kept a creative team. If they have, it's still about, you know, 60 or 70 less than Stan and Jack did. So I don't know that the industry is set up for any, you know, long term teams, because I think if somebody goes more than a year, 18 months, I think then the company will break it up.
Exactly. Exactly. There's just there's a lot of it's a lot of bureaucracy, and you know, there's just so much. I think the comic book industry is just not really focused, I think, right now on what they want to be, and I think they're really having a hard time um you know, deciding what they're going to be going forward, right? Because there's a lot they're dealing with. Don't get me wrong. Like, they're trying to cater to the collectors. They're trying to, write for omnibuses and trade paperbacks. But I think the reason why, for example, manga is killing comics is because they're focused, right? They're focused on story. It's just about story. And if they kill a character, that character's dead, except for in Dragon Ball. But that's besides the point. Yeah, like it's a sticky situation for comics right now. I definitely think. And then there's someone said earlier here about slabbing. There's something else now that I think is really trying to bring in the more of these speculators, and it's ruining it for people that genuinely like comics.
Well, one of the things that is the law of unintended consequences, and this is where it affects the collectors. I've just started collecting. Let's say I see a book that a title that I want to collect, and I look and I see that okay, 3, 3, 4, 5, 3, 3, 300. Why is issue 10 worth $300 when the rest of the series isn't worth that put together? Well, I'm slightly exaggerating a Teen Titans run, because issue 12 had the first appearance of the Batman Who Laughs. And no, he was not, that character wasn't announced to be in a movie. That actually happened because of fan interest. But if you're one of those people that likes to collect complete runs, and every time you look at a series, there's those 1 or 2 books that are, triple digits because that character was used in a TV show and the speculators drove it up. It's like you look at it, how about if I just don't start it all together? Because I don't want that hole sitting there. Now, it's one thing when you're talking about old Spider-Man or like old Marvel and DC. They have stood the test of time and they've gone up naturally. But you do see so many things that just artificially inflate comic values. And it does, I said, it doesn't do it's more of a deterrent to collectors. I mean, some people just take whatever they can get their hands on. But, I said, that's hard for, and also I said, I do understand why, with the older books, but Spider-Mans have gone so high. You can't, I mean, like the set that I had, even in the condition that they were in, if I had them today, I could probably get 6 figures for my Spider-Mans alone.
Yep.
I didn't get 6 figures for my 55,000 books. And that was only 7 or 8 years ago.
Wow.
That's how stratospheric the prices have gotten on that title. Who could afford that? The only people that could afford those aren't comic book fans. They're the investors. They're the speculators.
They're the suits.
Yeah. And so they're the ones that are buying up all this stuff. And if there's no interest in the rest of it, because the rest of those people have gotten frustrated because they can't get the good stuff, everybody loses except for the guys that couldn't give 2 shits about the comics that they're investing in, because it's just a bottom line to them.
Exactly. And I mean, and that, want to wrap up. We're almost out of time here, but I can't end this show without asking, what the heck is going on with comic book prices nowadays? Why? Like it seems like everything is just going nutty with, actually, I think with collectibles in general. I'm not just talking about comic books. I'm talking even about old video games, like everything.
This latest round of insanity, I think you can blame that which we weren't allowed to say out loud for the first year and a half.
Yeah.
Because everybody became instant shut-ins. Everybody got free money. Everybody had an unbelievable amount of time on their hands. So a lot of people indulged in their nostalgia. and got back into hobbies that they said, yeah, hey, didn't I have a box of this, or didn't I have the old Sega Genesis, whatever the hell? I never played a video game, so I'm gonna sound like an idiot. Up in the attic, and again, I
Yeah.
get this, and people started buying this stuff, and then people go, "Ooh, well, if they were paying 10 for it yesterday, I bet they'll pay 20 for it tomorrow." And you started seeing prices kick in on all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's bad because like I remember I started really getting into comic books like a lot, probably about, it's been over 10 years now. It's probably been about 12 years now. And I remember when I started getting into the hobby, uh and I was in graduate school at the time. So I didn't really have that much money, but I was able to build a pretty kick-ass collection for, and I can tell you I have never spent more. I think the most I've ever spent on one book is $500. That's the most I've ever spent on a book. And it's nowadays those same books, when I look up at like the prices on some of these books, I'm like, what the heck is going on? Like there were some really nice deals to be had on eBay back then. Like even we're talking even 7 years ago. And nowadays, everything on eBay, everything, it's like everybody's trying to make a profit.
Yes, that's. I mean, again, there's you see this on there, and a lot of the stuff though you look a couple months later and you see the same ones on there. I mean, there's only so much the rubber band can stretch before it snaps, and prices are just so out of control, especially on eBay. But then if you time and patience, you can find some decent deals on there even today. But again, like I said, that's the problem. Is that the stuff that used to be sold into stores are now being sold by individuals. So a lot of the comic book shops aren't getting the back issues the way they used to. And another reason also is when I think about when I started in this hobby, a book that was 30 years old would have been like that Promise collection you were talking about earlier.
Right.
You know what a 30-year-old book is now? Image.
Yep.
So it's, that's, it's just, time, the passage of time.
Right.
There's, like I said, those 60s and 70s books, there just aren't a whole lot of them out there that aren't either in somebody's collection or trying to be sold, by individuals.
Right. Like I actually remember being able to buy some older books from the 70s and the 80s in dollar bins, 50-cent bins.
Oh yeah.
It was great. I remember buying like I still remember this day because I felt like I hit the jackpot, even though they weren't valuable comics, but I thought I hit the jackpot because I bought a stack of, the Defenders from the
Mm-hmm.
70s. I bought like a stack of books like this for like, they were all in like a 50-cent bin. And I like had a lot of Defenders to read, and it was great. But like nowadays, it's all expensive. And like you were saying, the thing about Image, all of that crap essentially was all in like dollar bins, and even like X-Men #1, the Jim Lee, like all that stuff was all in like
Mm-hmm.
these bargain bins. And now even that stuff is is going up in price. So
A few of them are.
yeah, and it's funny because I think you made a good point about the fact that there aren't a lot of these 70s and 60s books floating around anymore because they're either in people's collections or whatever. So now people are having to go to the 80s, go to the 90s now to get their collecting fixes, and that's driving up the prices even for that stuff.
Yeah, on a lot of it is. What I've noticed is Marvel back issues is a license to print money.
Hmm.
DC is a tough sell
Yep,
because the as far as the people that are still collecting, it's almost like it's a Marvel or bust mentality.
for sure.
Now, this might just, I mean, I don't know if it's everywhere, but it certainly is in my area. And, I keep hearing stories about people that are having to pay big bucks for Dell and Gold Key. I can't get that for those at my place, because the majority of the fan bases of those companies are either on fixed income or up there.
Right.
And so, but yeah, again, though, I said it because those are 50, 60, 70 years old now.
Yep.
But yeah, as far as like the 90s books go, if you know where to look, you can still find a lot of them fairly cheap. In the 80s, which doesn't seem like it's that long ago. Well, if you're my age, those you're not finding those as easily as you used to.
Right. Absolutely. And
Because they're 30 something years old now.
Yeah. Some of them 40, right? So
yeah,
it's nuts. It's just crazy. It's ludicrous. So I have to ask, what I love asking you this question because I always get the same answer, but what is your prediction for the future of comic collecting?
pain.
I love it. I love it. I have to ask all the time, right?
No, it's I do think it's gonna survive for a while, but it's gonna take. Yeah, there's gonna be a correction, and it's already started. I mean, some of the prices are starting to come down. There are books that are never going to. I mean, the Spider-Mans are going to be. Unfortunately, I don't think they're ever going to be affordable again to the average collector. But some of the other stuff, as long as it's not a legitimate first appearance, you are starting to see somewhat of a market correction.
And that's super interesting that you say that, because I remember I think when I started collecting, Amazing Spider-Man books were just slowly starting to come up in price. And I remember Spectacular Spider-Man was like cheap as heck. I was just filling up boxes full of Spectacular Spider-Man. Now even those are super expensive.
I'll tell you, in the early 2000s, this will tell you how it would have been, hell, maybe like 2005, 2006. I spent the most I've ever spent on a comic book. It was Amazing Fantasy 15.
Wow.
My dealer worked it out because we were old friends, to where it would come to $999.99. So I could say I never spent $1,000 on a book.
Right.
That copy is probably 20 or 30,000 now.
Yep.
And we're not even talking a generation.
Yep.
And that's it. That has half an ad page torn out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep. That's just nuts. I can't believe it. Now, my last question.
Oh, before you ask that, I'm going to say, hang in there, Zach, buddy. Just 2 more days. You'll get that.
Oh, okay. Do you think that the collectible comic book market will go bust again like it did in the 90s? Because honestly, I welcome a bust, because that means I could probably start collecting comics again.
It didn't actually go bust. I mean, it just weeded out some of the carpetbaggers.
Right.
Now that may happen again, because at some point when you realize that all those modern keys or modern variants you speculated on, you're not getting your money back, you're going to start realizing that maybe Apple stock is a better alternative after all. When that Apple stock certificate means as much to you as a Spider-Man 10, because it's just pieces of paper in a safe to you, then maybe.
Yeah.
Because like I said, it's as I said, you're already seeing some kind of correction. The variant market's always going to be there, unfortunately, and I understand why they're variants, because there's so much piracy now. There's no percentage in pirating a variant cover. So sometimes that's the only way you can sell the physical copies. I would argue if you didn't make, if the vast majority of your comics weren't shit, you'd get more people that actually wanted to buy them.
Right.
But in lieu of that, but I think you might see the speculators might start dropping off in the next couple of years.
Yeah, well, only time will tell, and hopefully comic book collecting can be for the actual fans again at some point. But
It would be nice.
yeah, for sure. Eric, thank you so much for joining us again this evening. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. You're a lot of fun to chat with.
Right back at you.
Yeah, so we definitely will be having you again sometime soon, hopefully within the next month again.
Sounds good.
And yeah, and thank you all for joining us for this live stream. If for those of you that that need to listen to this again or something, this will also be posted as a podcast as well on our podcast channel. For those of you out there that don't know, Geekery with Dante D now does have a podcast. It's available on every single podcast directory. So hope to see you there as well. Once again, thank you all for joining us. Eric, you look like you have one more thing to say.
I do. Congratulations on 10,000.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And thank you to all of the subscribers as well. Our channel finally hit 10,000 subscribers. Eric, you've pretty much been with me since the beginning. So, a special thank you to you as well. It's been a pleasure to get to know you over these past few years.
And I don't make you read War and Peace size comments anymore.
Yeah. No. Actually, I enjoyed those.
But now we can do it in person. So, yeah.
Exactly.
So sure. Anybody that's not sub to this gentleman, rectify that immediately. Looking at you, Zach.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. So, and we will see you again soon in an upcoming episode. But for now, this is Dante D and Eric Breen signing off. We will see you all in the next episode. Take care.
Good night, kids.